The screen is clear? Hello?
Yes, sir.
আর সাউন্ড ঠিক আছে?
হ্যাঁ, এখন আপাতত ঠিক আছে।
বাস ঠিক আছে, আশা করছি প্রবলেম হবে না। ওকে, ঠিক আছে, শুরু করছি। So welcome to the second lecture of this 3-week online webinar on nanotechnology and environment, an initiative of the Department of Physics, Prabhat Kumar College, Kontai. And today we got a little bit late because of some network issues and technical problems. Without get further introduction, let's get in. As like our previous instruction, the lectures will be for 45 minutes or 1 hour maximum, and there will be discussions. Because in the last lecture, I found a lot of questions. I think that should be addressed in general, because some questions have been answered through their emails and WhatsApp, but I think there are some other questions that needs to be answered directly in the to the entire platform. So I will answer those questions during the discussion sessions also. And already I have seen, so you have to mute your audios, etc. And if you have any questions, you can drop it in your YouTube or Zoom chat box. And one more essential is that I will share a link for the feedback, feedback link that I have provided from the provided yesterday. Actually, that will not work. I will circulate this feedback just after the completion of the lecture, and the link will remain open from 10:15 to 12. So please send your feedback within this stipulated time. And this is an integral part of the evaluation of not only our lectures, but it is also mandatory for giving certificates to you. Provided yesterday. Actually, that will not work. Such.
Proceed.
হ্যাঁ, এখানে একটা ব্যাকগ্রাউন্ড ভয়েস করে দিতে, ঠিক আছে। Okay. So in this second lecture, I shall discuss about the preparation of nanomaterial. Because in earlier lecture I have talked about various properties of nanomaterials. Now we shall see how to prepare these nanomaterials. This is an important issue, and these preparation techniques are very important, because unless we take suitable precautions and following suitable steps, it will be very difficult to obtain suitable sized nanoparticle for understanding their properties. So as we have found, there are many students, mostly from UG background, BSc first year, second year, etc. And they have a very little knowledge of crystallography and solid state physics. So I shall initially discuss a little bit within 2-3 slides about the structure of solids, and then I shall move to our preparation section, because otherwise I'll use several terms that will be difficult for them to understand. So as we know, nanomaterials are in the forefront of research due to their unique and exotic properties arising due to their smaller size. In the previous lectures, I have already discussed about various exciting properties of different nanomaterials, especially the metal nanoparticles and semiconductor quantum dots. We also see that those properties are mainly developed due to two major phenomena. One is large surface area, and the second was quantum confinement effect that I have already discussed in detail in the last lecture. There I have also discussed about application of nanomaterials in optoelectronics, nanoelectronic devices, sensors, catalysis, antimicrobial activity, and many more like nanoparticle-based drug delivery, nanorobots, etc. I also discussed that the size of the nanoparticle plays an important role in moderating its various physical, mechanical, chemical, optical, and electronic properties. So, before entering into various synthesis process, first let us discuss about the classification of materials. Although most of us are aware about the classification of material based on their conductivity, the highest conductivity are for metals that have a conduction band and valence band superposed, whereas in case of insulator, the band gap is very high, so that the electrons of the valence band cannot be excited to the conduction band. So they practically exhibit no conductivity. Glass is a good example of that. And in between that, there is another kind of material which is known as semiconductor, which has band gap, but the band gap value is quite low, so that the electron in the valence band can be excited to the conduction band, so that they exhibit conductivity at some elevated temperature and also sometimes at room temperature. But in most of the cases, the commonly available semiconductor, we know, silicon and germanium, these are usually insulated at room temperature, but they exhibit high conductivity in the high temperature region, as you have already done in your p-n junction diode experiments also. So now, as we know, solid materials mainly consist of atoms or molecules. Based on the arrangement of these atoms and molecules, we classify the solids into two categories. One is amorphous and the second one is crystalline. In amorphous solids, the atoms are not arranged in a regular manner. Here you see the atoms are randomly arranged. So no regular arrangement or pattern is observed in these solids. Whereas there are some other materials where the atoms or molecules are arranged in a periodic manner. Theoretically, we can say this arrangement may go up to infinity, but due to finite crystal size, this arrangement is broken off after a finite length, after a finite dimension. So glass is a very common example of amorphous material, and all kinds of metals we commonly see like copper, iron, aluminum, gold, silver, etc. These are all crystalline. Even if the table salt, this NaCl is also crystalline material. And there are two categories of crystalline materials. One is monocrystalline, another is polycrystalline. So what is that? In case of monocrystallines, you see all the atoms are arranged in the same manner. Whereas in case of polycrystalline material, you can see the atoms are not arranged in the same manner, because you see here the arrangement is periodic, but the arrangement is different from this region and from this region. So it has different regions where the arrangements are different, but still the arrangement is periodic. So these type of crystals are polycrystals. So, and these are known as grains. So within these grains, so I'm showing these regions by this way. So these are the regions where we can find a periodicity. This is another region where you can find periodicity. This is another region where you can find periodicity. So different regions have different periodicity. So these are called grains basically. And these grains are separated by a boundary, which is known as grain boundary. And this grain boundary plays an important role in determining the properties of materials, both in microscale and nanoscale. So here I shall discuss how the material is formed, because in preparation this is very important. So if we think of a wall, brick walls, you can see that these are the bricks and they are arranged in some periodic manner to produce the entire bricks. So similarly, in the crystal, the atoms or a group of atoms are arranged in a periodic manner, and that group is periodically repeated. You can see in this diagram that this cubic structure is repeated in the entire three-dimensional space to produce a large crystal. So this is what is called unit cell, and the corresponding atoms are called lattice points or if the points are replaced by the atoms, then the entire system will be crystals. So I'm showing here how the unit cells are formed. Suppose in a crystal, the atoms are arranged like this, and I'm taking, this is a unit cell. I'm showing this example for a two-dimensional case. And if you see, this two-dimensional structure can repeat in the entire area to cover up. So this is the unit cell. If someone says, no, I'll choose the new unit cell like this, no problem. The same thing, you see, this is a repetition of again and again to produce the entire crystal. So both of these two can serve as the unit cell. But in this case, no atoms residing at the centers, whereas in this case, one atom is residing at the centers. So here the effective number of atoms is 1, because all these atoms are not in this cell, because this is divided into this part. This is also belongs to these cells also. So effectively, this cell contains only one atom. Effective number of atoms is 1. So these cells are known as primitive cell, whereas where the effective number of atoms are greater than 2, those are known as non-primitive cell. So people may have infinite number of choice of these cells, because I can take the unit cells like this, like triangles and so on. So how many ways are possible? Theoretically speaking, infinite number of ways are possible. But if we take the symmetry and reflection symmetry, rotation symmetry, etc., that we have may have learned in your solid state physics course, you can see there are only 7 type of configurations are possible. So in case of a crystal, we define unit cell as the smallest unit which on continuous repetition in the 3 dimension produce the entire crystal. And for a unit cell, we define 3 parameters, A, B, and C. These sites are A, B, and C. These are called lattice parameters, and these are the 3 angles, alpha, beta, and gamma. So if any unit cell, if any system have unit cells with A equal to B equal to C and alpha, beta, gamma equal to 90 degree, that is cubic. And if the C is extended more, that is A equal to B not equal to C, but alpha, beta, gamma all are 90 degree, that is tetragonal. In case of orthorhombic, the sides are unequal, but the angles are 90 degree. Similarly, monoclinic, hexagonal, rhomboidal, and triclinic. So these are only 7 class of system. Whatever type of unit cell you choose, Videsh, mute. Okay. So these are the varieties of unit cell. Whatever of unit cell you choose, they must fall into these following 7, any of these 7 categories. These 7 cells are basically called Bravais lattice, and there are several class of Bravais lattice, so that we can have total 14 configuration. So here you see, if the atom resides on the only at the corners of the cell, then that is called primitive cubic structures. I think I'm getting some background problem. If someone of you have mic unmuted, then please mute it. Okay. The atom may be placed at the corners as well as at the center of the cell. That is the body-centered cubic. And if the atom lies in the faces, all the 6 faces, that is called face-centered cubic. And another configuration is there. In that case, along with these corner atoms, the atoms also lies on the top and bottoms. So these are that is called end-centered cell. So these are different varieties possible along with these configurations. So there are total 14 configuration of this Bravais lattice, and whatever the materials, crystalline material you choose, its unit cell must lie on any of these axes. So in during this material preparation course, I'll talk about crystals. So mostly I shall deal with the crystalline materials. If In some cases, some amorphous materials are there. I'll precisely mention. Otherwise, by the term crystal, I am meaning that the materials is crystalline. And in the characterization section, I shall discuss about how to choose these unit cells and how this controls the structures of the materials. Okay. So let us first start with the preparation of the materials. So preparation of the materials, amorphous, crystalline, or bulk or nano, whatever be the materials preparation, depending on its state, is classified into 4 categories. One, we can produce a thin film. Second one, we can produce the nanoparticles like colloids, small particles dispersed in the solution. We can also prepare in the form of powder, and we can also prepare in the form of compact structures. So, okay, I'll be discussing these issues during describing the methods. So mostly I shall deal with the methods associated with the fabrication or synthesis of nanomaterials. So in synthesis of nanomaterials, there are mostly 2 approaches. One is top-down approach and another is bottom-up approach. In top-down approach, we have a large size crystals or material. We hammer it to produce powder, and we hammer it further to produce small particle. For example, suppose we have a large stone, we hammer it to produce small size stones. That is one kind of example of top-down approach. And another is bottom-up approach. In case of bottom-up approach, we have small atoms. They are agglomerated together to form the cluster of atoms, and those clusters are assembled together to produce the crystals. So these are the 2 approaches that we shall use in fabricating or synthesizing various nanomaterials. So let us discuss about the top-down approach. So amongst various top-down approach, we shall consider mostly the mechanical grinding, ball milling, and lithography. I shall mostly discuss here only the 2, mechanical grinding and ball milling, because we are lacking of time. Maybe if time permits, we shall discuss about the lithography. Okay, let's discuss about the mechanical grinding. What is that? This technique, as you see, the picture suggests, this technique is being used from very ancient time. Here we have a motor and a pestle, and bulk particles are put into the material, and we have to crush this material with this pestle to produce small size crystals. Okay. This technique was also earlier used in preparing various Ayurveda's medicine and bhasmas, etc. So now let us enter more into the process, how to prepare material using this technique. So to prepare this material, first we have to take stoichiometric, we have to first set a stoichiometric reaction. That these will be, these are my reactant and these are my product. We have to establish this stoichiometric equation. Then we have to calculate the stoichiometric weight of each precursor, how much weight to be taken of the each element, and then you have to mix it up. So we can mix it up over here, and then the entire material is to be grinded properly, because the grinding here is very important. I think this slide is not clear. I'll provide you later this slide. So what we have, first we have taken the material in the pestle, a motor, and by pestle we are just grinding this material, and during this grinding we can also use ethanol or methanol. Now we have to oxidize these materials. That means we have to calcine these mixture at very high temperature. But at what temperature should we calcine it? That temperature can be determined from the thermal analysis of the precursor materials. There are several techniques like thermogravimetric analysis, differential thermal analysis, and differential scanning calorimetry, by which you can study the thermodynamics of the material. That means at which temperature the material is changing the phase. And from those studies, you can determine the calcination temperature, the temperature at which this mixture will be to be calcined. So after determining these temperatures, you can calcine this mixture at a very high temperature, and then the temperature being around usually more than 1000 degrees Celsius, around 1200 to 1300 degrees Celsius. Obviously, it depends, because we have to take the temperature in such a way that the materials doesn't melt. And after this calcination, the calcination is usually done for more than a day. It's usually sometimes in some magnetic and ferroelectric materials, the calcination occurs for 3 day, 4 day continuous, 72 hours, 90 hours calcinations. After the calcinations, we get the product, and we have to again grind in the similar way to produce these particles. So the size of the particle strongly depends on the mechanical strength of the material and the duration of grinding, for how long will you grind, and also depend on the pressure you have applied during the grinding. Here you see, these are some ferroelectric materials, BAT-IFC composite systems, where you can see the fine particles are generated. Here the scale bar is, see, this is 100 micrometer. So I think the particle size are about 700, 800 nanometer, like that. You can see fine spherical nanoparticles have been formed. And one thing we must remember, that the scale bar in this SEM image is very important, because by using this scale bar, we can find the size, and this is automatically generated during this imaging by the device. Suppose here in this case, this scale bar is 4 micron. That means this much length is 4 micron. If you put it over here, we can see this is about twice of this length. So this particle size is 8 microns. So this way, by studying the scanning electron microscope or electron microscope image, we can observe this prepared structure. This ACMM technique I will be discussed in my next lecture, probably. So as you have already mentioned, the control parameters are the mechanical strength of the material. If the material is quite hard, then you have to apply a lot of pressure to grind. Otherwise, your particle size will be large. And of course, if you grind for a long time, obviously the particle size will be reduced. And so the major difficulty, as you can really understand, that we have to apply a lot of pressure by our hand. That is very exhaustive and very difficult. And this is a very manual method. And it requires a long time of milling, long time of grinding. Suppose usually the grinding is done for about 10 to 15 hours. So 10 to 15 hours grinding is really very difficult and exhaustive. So to remove these difficulties, an automated system has been devised that is known as ball milling system. So what is ball milling system? Ball milling system basically an automated mechanical technique to produce these nanoparticles from large scale to small scale. So that is from bulk to nanoscale. So okay, let us enter more into that. So it is a very high and efficient techniques, and obviously low cost techniques of producing nanocrystalline materials. The basic principle of size reduction in this method is based on the principle of energy imparted by this high energy ball into the particles. So suppose this is a bulk particles of materials, and these are two balls. These balls are moving with very high speed. They will collide, and during collision, when the bulk particle is in between them, this high energy is imparted into the material. And depending on the strength of the material, this bulk structure can be broken into several parts to produce nanoparticles. So let us discuss a bit about the construction of this system. So it basically consists of hollow cylindrical cylinders, mostly made of steel, and these cylinders are capable of rotating about an axis. You can see these are the cylinders. This can rotate about this axis, its vertical axis, and sometimes the axis is inclined a little bit about this vertical one. Sometimes in some cases the axis may be horizontal also. That depends on the type of the machines used. So usually small size steel or rubber balls are used along with this cylinder. In this cylinder, we have to put the material. Suppose I want to prepare, say, iron oxide, Fe2O3 nanoparticles. So we have bulk Fe2O3 structures. I'm putting that bulk Fe2O3 over here, and I'm putting some steel balls over here. And this weight ratio of this material and the ball plays an important role in determining the final product size of the nanoparticles. So once these are loaded, this opening is sealed. You can see this is sealed properly, and it is then mounted on this base over here. And once this base rotates, these cylindrical vials will also rotate. Usually the length of these cylinders are around 20 centimeter and its diameter about 10 to 15 centimeters, although from machine to machine it varies. So when the base rotates, the cylinders also rotates with a very high speed. So during this rotation, what happens? The balls collides with each other, and when these ball particles comes in between, then during this collision, energy is imparted into this particle. As a result, depending on the strength of the material, elastic deformation occurs. So when the applied force exceeds the plastic limit of the material, then a huge shear is generated that results in the fracture in the material, so that the materials get broken into many pieces. Here I'm showing a video. Here you can see this is the rotating cylindrical base, in which these greens, yellows are particles and these reds are balls. So when it is rotating, the balls are colliding with themselves and also falling on the particles. And due to this collision, the particles are broken into the nanostructures. So here are some examples of ball mill synthesized iron oxide nanoparticles. Here you see the scale bar is starting from here to here. This is 300 microns. So you can see these particles are about 200 nanometers like that. So these are few examples of ACM image. I'll show one more over here. These are also TEM image of the nanoparticle produced by this one. And here you see suppose here this is for the initial this is the initial product, and this is the product after grinding mechanical milling of 1 hour, for 2 hour, for 4 hour, and for 8 hour and 16 hours. So as we see, on increasing the milling duration, the particle size reduces, which is very obvious. Here you can see the graph also. In the graph, you see as the milling hour increases, the particle reduced from 830. Initially, we taken the 830 nanometer size particles, and this is reduced to 197 nanometer. However, the particle size reduction is quite ridiculous because you have to mill the system for a long time. Usually, the milling is done for 20-50 hours, from 20-50 hours to, in fact, few days, 3-4 days also, for getting very teeny nanoparticles. So this is what is the ball milling method that we have discussed, but it has one major difficulty, that the nanoparticles produced by this method is non-homogeneous. You can see these nanoparticles have different size. So the particle sizes are not same for all of them. And as you have already seen, the property of the material depends on the size of the particles. So this is very difficult to get a uniform property. So why it is being used? Suppose in case of a nanoparticle, in case of a material, if it shows nanoscale behavior below say 20 nanometer or 30 nanometer, then if its particle size ranges from 50 to 70, it doesn't matter. The entire system will behave like bulk structures. So in that case, we can use this ball milling system. So this is the main difficulty usually dealt with this type of system. Otherwise, this is a very good technique or to produce ferroelectric and ferromagnetic oxides nanoparticles mostly. So I shall discuss this issue later during the chemical growth. Okay. Now I shall focus to some other method, that is bottom-up approach. So there are several approaches of synthesizing nanomaterials through the bottom-up process. So what I've discussed in bottom-up process, that we start with atoms or molecules. They will form the cluster over here, and those cluster again tends to grow to produce the nanocrystal. So there are varieties of process. They are in bottom-up process. I think I have missed the slide. Here are the process involved in the bottom-up growth of nanomaterials. So bottom-up growth can be done in two ways: in liquid phase, and it can be also done in vapor phase. The liquid phase involves chemical reaction method, Sol-Gel process, hydrothermal process, electrochemical process, spray pyrolysis, deep casting, and Langmuir blockade. Actually, Langmuir blockade is mostly used to prepare protein film. And the vapor phase growth in bottom-up process includes thermal evaporation. I think this is physical evaporation and the chemical evaporation, the sputtering, chemical vapor deposition, pulse laser deposition, laser ablation, and the molecular beam epitaxy. This is a very costly equipment, but this is a very sophisticated device to play with the material atom by atom. We can grow atom by atom, and we can selectively place some atom in a particular place. That can be achieved in this molecular beam epitaxy. So let us first discuss about the laser ablation process. So I shall now move over there. As there are most of the students are undergraduate first year, second year, so I shall first give a brief of the properties of laser. As the name suggests, laser, you must be knowing, this is light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation. So I'm not going to discuss about the stimulated emission of radiation, but maybe it will be possible to discuss in some other classes. So this is what is laser. So the term is light amplification. So what the term suggests, that the light is get amplified by this process. So what are the characteristics of this laser? Because laser, so all of you have seen. This laser light is highly monochromatic. It is coherent. It has a very high intensity. That is, energy of the beam is very high, and less spreading or scattering. Because if you if you have a torch light, commonly you are using, if you shine it, and if you observe from 10-15 meters, you see the light has been scattered over a wide range, so that the intensity not getting over there at 10-15 meters away. But if you use laser light, then this scattering or spreading is very small. Even if you shine a torch light over here, if you shine a torch light over here, you can see that not the laser light, you can see it can move few hundreds of kilometers without any scattering. Suppose initially, if the diameter of this beam is say 1 to 2 nanometer, after passing over 100 kilometers away, you can see the beam has almost the same diameter. The divergence is very small. That's the beauty of laser. And the laser can be used to synthesize material. So that is what is known as laser ablation. So what is the basic principle of laser ablation? The basic principle of laser ablation is that we use a highly intense, highly energetic laser beam to vaporize or melt a material and to produce a plasma plume that will in turn produce the entire nanoparticles. So here is the system I have shown here. So here we have a high intensity laser beam. Usually the laser used is neodymium. Usually the laser used here is neodymium doped yttrium aluminum garnet NDYAG laser. This is a high intense laser, nanosecond laser having wavelength 1062 nanometer and 25 kilohertz pulse. And we have a lens to focus this laser beam. Suppose we want to prepare say gold nanoparticles. So we first take a beaker over here and we take deionized water in this beaker, and this laser beam is targeted into this metal. So once this highly intense laser beam is incident on this metal, then it evaporates this metal. If you want to produce gold nanoparticle, you take here is a gold slice, gold foil. If you want to produce silver, you have to take silver. If you want to produce titanium, you have to use titanium. Whatever nanoparticle you want to prepare, you have to use it as a target over here. So once the particles are formed over here, they will be dispersed within these solutions. So as the here you can see, once the laser is incident over here, these plume nanoparticles or metal particles are produced. And as the laser is targeting over a particular point, so this portion may be forced up. So we have to move this material for a uniform vaporization. For this purpose, we used XYZ plane, XYZ movement platform to move this target element so that we can vaporize from defined portion of the target. So here you see, we have showing the production. We're showing the production of nanoparticles. We have focused this highly intense laser beam. It is falling on a gold slice, and the plasma plumes are produced. As a result, these nanoparticles are produced. I'm showing here a video. I'll show you a video over here. There, the entire process is there, so that you can see it. I'm sharing the video. Just wait for a moment. Here it is. So, as I start from initially over here. So, production of nanoparticles by laser ablation. You can see over here we have a gold target, a simple gold foil, and it is placed in the liquid in this beaker, and the laser beam will incident on it. Now see what happens. Once the laser beam incident over here, the material is melted initially, and used metals nanoparticles are produced, and that are that produced colloids in the solution. So this is what is the colloids of gold nanoparticles. So in case of silver, you see in case of gold, the solution was reddish color in nature. Now you see, this is the case of silver nanoparticles. The solution looks like yellow. This is a yellow color solution. This is the case of titanium. It will ash color type, bluish ash like that. I think you can see. So this is a very simple and interesting process of producing small size ultrafine metal nanoparticles. This is the case of zinc. This is mostly transparent, and also you can have a light ash yellow type colors. This is magnesium. I think the process is clear over here, so I must close this video. And now let us get into the main point again. So this is what is known as pulse laser deposition process. And although it look here, you see the ACM image produced due to this laser ablation. So these are the not the same. This is TA image. This is the image of the material under different magnification when the solvent solution was done in ethanol, and this is water and ethanol mixed 1:2. The particle variations is like this. When with water and by varying the water ethanol concentration, we can modulate the shape of the nanoparticle. This is because of the nature of the solvent, which may prevent the agglomeration of the particle or may help to agglomerate the particles. As a result, different types of different size nanoparticles will be formed. So we have to think the process to be very simple. This is the actual setup you see, and what I want to show over here, this is the not the entire setup. What I want to show here, the laser usually have very high power. So what you see, these are actually the lasers. Okay, this is a very large size, and it consumes very high power for operation. This is the laser ablation unit of University of Ottawa in Canada. That is one of the reputed lab in the world to produce ultra-fine metal nanoparticles using this laser ablation process. So now I shall quickly move over to another process, a little bit modification of this process, which is known as the pulse laser deposition. So what is pulse laser deposition? This is a very simple process. It is just like the previous process, laser ablation. In laser ablation, what we have seen, that the laser beam incident on the metal target and it produce plasma plumes, and these particles then dispersed in the solution. Now here we'll not take this target in a solution, rather we shall put a substrate over here so that these nanoparticles get deposited over the substrate and we get a thin film. So here is the process. So here is the target. So target means it basically composed of materials of which you want to produce nanoparticles. Suppose you want to produce say zinc oxide thin film. So you have to take a pellet of zinc oxide. Pellet means like tablet size. You know the different kinds of tablets, thin cylindrical tablets. So the material, say if we want to produce zinc oxide, we have to take a pellets of zinc oxide fixed over here. Usually the size, the tablet should have diameter about 2-3 centimeters. Okay, and we have a highly intense laser beam, and we have a substrate. Substrate means it may be glass, it may be quartz, or it may be some other plates on which this metal zinc oxide will be deposited. And this entire system is taken in a metallic chamber and it made vacuum so that the pressure gets very low, by -6 millimeter of mercury, which is an ultra high vacuum. And here is a quartz window through which the laser beam will enter into the material. So once the laser beam enters into hit the target, then for plasma plumes, that means particles are generated. Those particles are deposited in the substrate. The substrate is additionally attached to the motor so that it can be slowly rotated to get a uniform size thin film. So this is more or less the basic process of pulse laser deposition. And here I am showing an animation. Okay. That will be very clear. From this animation, you will understand how it will work. So let's see the animation. Here it is. So you have this laser pulse. The laser pulse is allowed to incident on this target, and as a result, atoms are generated, plasma plumes are generated. This is the substrate, and this plasma plume will be deposited over this substrate. And let us now allow the process to grow. So this is the film, and we see how the particles are getting deposited over there. This is actually the inverted portion of the figure. So this is the laser beam, laser source, which can produce the pulse laser, and the laser pulse may have different. It may be a large pulse, it may be a short pulse also. So I'm skipping these portions over here. Here you can see, as the laser beam falls, these are the plasma plumes, the plumes that are being generated and gets deposited over here. So what are the factors this deposition depends? So here first I show the configuration. The actual setup is like this. I have mentioned this entire thing is under a vacuum chamber. There is a vacuum gauge to measure the pressure and temperature. So to production of vacuum, we must have a vacuum pump, and there is also arrangement to introduce additional gases like argon or oxygen, nitrogen, depending on the type of requirement. So so these are the I must mention over here. These are the various control factors, deposit parameters, like the target material, what type of material that I want to deposit. Is it metal? Is it semiconductor, or etc.? The temperature, gas or vacuum, whether we want to insert any kind of inert gas or we want to get the deposition in vacuum, the pressure, the sample target distance, pulse length, pulse rate, and radius intensity. And all these parameters will control the composition of the film, crystallinity of the film, whether it will be amorphous, whether it will be crystalline, whether it will be monocrystalline, or it will be polycrystalline. And the time of deposition controls the thickness and thickness of the film. Also, the type of the material determines the roughness. And obviously, depending on the size, the conductivity, optical, mechanical properties, etc., that will get changed. Here, I am also show one effect, that is the impact of distance. The target to this substrate distance plays an important role in the uniformity of the film. If the target to substrate distance is small, then huge number of particles will be deposited in a small region. That's like a heap of atoms over there. That's like, suppose we have some flat space, we have some garbages over there. So film smoothness will not be there, rather agglomeration of the particles will be there. Whereas if the target to substrate distance is increased, then the deposition rate will be slow, but the uniformity will be much better. So this is more or less the laser ablation process. Now I shall quickly go into the third process, which is known as the chemical method. So let us discuss about the chemical method in brief, because there are so many methods. I think I'll not be able to get time to discuss all those methods, and if time permits, I will discuss these methods in some later class also. So there is another method which is known as hydrothermal method also, and for the timing I'm skipping this part. So I shall directly go into the chemical synthesis of nanomaterial. Mostly this synthesis method is used for production of ultrafine metal and metal oxide nanoparticles with very high yield. So usually the chemical synthesis of nanoparticles essentially have three major components. One is metal salt, another is capping agent, and the third one is the reducing agent. So metal salt will be used to produce the nanoparticle. Suppose if we want to prepare gold nanoparticle, we have to use gold salt like hydrogen chloride, etc., orochlorate, and we have to silver, then silver chloride, etc., etc. That is the metal salt. And we have to use capping agent. The capping agent mostly like several kinds of citrate, polyvinyl propanol, polyvinyl alcohol like polymers, CTAB, thiols, etc. And We also need some reducing agent. Reducing agent mostly we use ascorbic acid, sodium citrate, sodium borohydrate, etc. So the production of nanoparticles by this chemical method usually occurs in two steps. One is nucleation and the second one is the growth. So now let us discuss what is nucleation. Once the metal salts are given, the reagents are given, the reaction initiates. So after initiation of the reaction, the formation of the nanoparticles occurs. That are actually called nanoseeds, basically, or nuclei. This is what is called nucleation. Here, nuclei does not mean the nucleus of the atoms. Here, nuclei means the initial small particles that mainly have only 2-3 atoms. That is what is the nuclei meaning over here. Okay, that is also sometimes called the seeds for growing. So this is what is nucleation. So these small particles are formed. So now these small particles are agglomerate and crystallize to produce the entire nanocrystal. So nucleation may be two types. Not maybe, that is there are only two types of nucleation over here. One is homogeneous nucleation and the second one is the heterogeneous nucleation. So let us discuss one by one. So what is homogeneous nucleation? It occurs spontaneously and randomly in the solution, leading to the formation of the solid phase from a supersaturation liquid phase. That means we have a gold solution of gold salts. After that is the phase A, and from there we can produce gold nanoparticles in solid form. That is the phase B. In supersaturation state, the system have very high Gibbs free energy, and as you know, system with Gibbs free energy, high Gibbs free energy is not thermodynamically supported. So the system will tend to reduce the Gibbs free energy to make the system thermodynamically stable. So as a result, crystalline solids will be formed to expel this energy. That means to reduce the energy. And as you know, the crystalline structures have least energy. So, and this mechanism is actually the driving force for this nucleation as well as the growth also. And during the growth, we can have two major constants. One is the surface energy and another is the strain energy. Surface energy, we already know that arises due to the number of surface atoms in the crystals, and other is the strain energy, which arises due to difference in volume in different phase. Suppose in liquid phase, the particles have some volume, and when the crystal grows, its volume changes. So there will be obviously surface strain that needs to be taken into account. So here I am taking the entire change in the Gibbs free energy. So it has three contributions. One is from the volume energy, second one is the surface energy, and third one is the strain energy. The volume energy is obviously proportional to the volume. So if we have considered a metal nanoparticle formed with a radius r, then its volume energy is 4 pi r cube multiplied by this delta GV. Where this delta GV is the free energy per unit volume for the formation of the solid phase. And the surface energy is obviously proportional to the surface area, which is 4 pi r square times the gamma, where this gamma is nothing but the surface tension. That is the surface energy per unit area. So that is the interchange in the surface energy. And the third one is due to strain energy, which is depends on volume. And this delta GS is the change in strain energy per unit volume. So we can have the energy equations like this. I will not go into details of this kinetics of this nucleation. So here I am showing the Lamirez diagram to understand the nucleation process. So initially, the metal solutions are there, and the nucleation starts. So this shows the variation of the atomic concentration in the solution with reaction time. When the concentration gets saturated, nucleation starts. Nucleation means the production of small particles, or what is a seeds, are formed. However, In case of homogeneous nucleation, all nuclei are generated simultaneously. So a huge number of nuclei are simultaneously generated, leading to formation of small size nanoparticles. So the structure or the prepared nanoparticles will be uniform in size. But if the nucleation is heterogeneous, that means the nuclei will form at different time. That means some nuclei have formed right now and some will be formed maybe after 3-4 seconds. That is the heterogeneous nucleation. So what happens? Suppose if I have a nucleus right now, and the second nucleus will be generated after 2-3 seconds. By the meantime, some other particles will grow around this nuclei. So these nuclei will grow bigger than the earlier one. So we have a non-uniform size. Here I have shown two examples. Here you see in case of homogeneous nucleation, we have almost uniform size, that is monodispersed nanoparticles, whereas in the second case, due to homogeneous heterogeneous nucleation, we have polydispersed nanoparticles. This is also one kind of example, like if you say, okay, that will be discussed in the next slide. So to summarize up to this, what we have learned that the formation of the nanoparticles follows two steps. First is nucleation and the second one is growth. And nucleation is a formation of the initial nuclei to act as the growth center for the nanoparticles. This nucleation process controls the size and distribution and phase of the ground crystal. As we have seen, for homogeneous nucleation, the particle size will be uniform, and in case of heterogeneous nucleus, the material have different particle size. For small size nucleation, we must have strong nucleation and growth should be small so that the crystal cannot grow further. And agglomeration must be prevented, because once the agglomeration started, the particle will grow and the size of the particle will be bigger, that we don't want. So here is the nucleation process. You can see this is the metal salt. This reducing agent reduced it into metal ions, and which in turn produce the metal nanoparticles, which produce that is the nucleation. So after a formation of a critical size, this nuclei will join together, forms the clusters, and the clusters will then continue to grow up to produce these crystals. Now this crystal will be agglomerated to produce these large size particles, but we do not want these large size particles. So I must discuss here two phenomena. One is known as the arrested precipitation. Another is the Ostwald ripening. So what is this arrested precipitation? Let us discuss it first. Under vigorous mixing of the reactant, a large number of nuclei are formed, and if the concentration of growth is small, further nucleation will not occur due to lack of source material. Whereas in case of Ostwald ripening, small nuclei, sometimes it is observed that sometimes these small nuclei get dissolved and consumed by large particles, as you have discussed in the case of homogeneous heterogeneous growth. So as a result, the number of particles in the solution will decrease, the particle size will increase. So we have to stop this Ostwald ripening. Don't want this Ostwald ripening. Okay. So to reduce this Ostwald ripening, what to do? We have to use some other material which is known as stabilizer. So how the stabilizer work? Let us see. I think this is the nucleation growth. Okay. First discuss it. So here we have a precursor. If the nucleation is fast, then we have seen these small nanoparticles, and if this is slow nucleation, the growth will be higher and large particles of non-uniform size will be prepared. And this can be taken like suppose you have 50 rupees and you have 10 persons at a time. So you can distribute the 50 rupees into 10%. So 5 rupees per person. Equivalent, that amount is quite small. But if you had 50 rupees and you have only 2%, then you have to distribute 50-50, 25-25, or a little bit more or less than that. So the amount is larger. That is the case actually in case of homogeneous growth and the heterogeneous growth. So we want this fast nucleation and stabilization. So stabilization occurs in two ways. One is electrostatic stabilization and another is steric stabilization. So first let us discuss what is stabilizer. Stabilizers are nothing but some additional molecules, special types of molecules that can form ions. So in case of electrostatic stabilization, you see, just after the initiation of the nucleation, the stabilizer molecules are attached to these nanoparticles. Suppose this is your gold nanoparticles and the stabilizer atoms are covering the surface like this. As these are ions, so these two particles cannot come closer because due to this electrostatic repulsion, they will repel each other. So the agglomeration will not occur. As a result, we get small sized particle by this electrostatic stabilization. Another mechanism is steric stabilization. In this case, the metal nanoparticle is sterically covered by a bulky layer of polymers so that it cannot get agglomerated or coalesced with some other nanoparticles. So this agglomeration is prevented. So by these two ways, this electrostatic stabilization and steric stabilization, we can produce the fine nanoparticles. So what are the control parameters in this chemical process? The major control parameters are the concentration of the reactions, temperature of the solution, pH of the solution, type of the reducing agent, use of several surfactant and capping. I'm giving you another example of surfactant and capping that we have also reported. Suppose here we have a zinc oxide crystals. Okay. On the initiation of the reactions, we have a bare zinc oxide nanonuclides. So these are the different surfaces and these are the Miller indices. And this is a polar molecule. This 001 plane is plus and this minus 001 bar is minus. Now, here we have used the capping agent at hexamine. That means hexamethylene tetramine, CH2 and 4. This hexamine is non-polar. So this non-polar material will be deposited on these non-polar faces. So these non-polar faces are covered by the hexamine. So this crystal cannot grow in these ways. So only this 001 direction and 001 bar direction is left for growth. So the crystal will grow only along this direction and the opposite direction, and all other directional growth are prevented. This is also supported by this X-ray diagram. So this is what a surfactant do. It restricts the growth of the nanoparticles. So here is the typical method for growing nanoparticles. So in case of growing nanoparticles, we have hydrogen tetrachloride HAUCl4 and trisodium citrate. Trisodium citrate here is used to act as a weak stabilizer. I'm not going into the details of the reaction. I'm just going directly into the video. Kindly mute whoever is on. I'm directly going into the video to show you the synthesis of the gold nanoparticles. Okay. So Hijo Devoloraj Turevich and his group to prepare gold nanoparticles. So let me first discuss about this instrument a bit. Otherwise, it will be difficult. You may not be familiar with this. So this is a magnetic stirrer. What it do? It has a plate also over here. What it do? By applying powers, it has a rotating plate over in beside that. So we take the solution in this beaker and we put a magnet covered with Teflon. This you see this a white thing is rotating, is there. Yeah, this one. So this one actually the magnetic bit that can also rotate, so that the solution is get mixed. Suppose we have a sugar and we want to mix it in water, so we put the sugar in the water and mix with some spoons or stir, etc. So this is basically mechanically stirring using this device which is known as magnetic stirrer. So we shall start with 30 ml 0.5 millimole gold solution, aqueous gold chloride solution. They have taken in the beaker, and I'm just skipping some part and heating it. There is an heating arrangement. This plate can be heated and the temperature can be controlled. So the solutions are getting in. Now we shall add the reducing agent as trisodium citrate solution I have mentioned. So this is given to the solution. So you can see the reaction gets started. There is being this one. The reaction is going. As the time passes, you can you will observe the change in color. That means the nanoparticles are forming. Just you see here, particle color of the solution will change. I'm skipping a bit. Here you see the color is getting denser. The color is getting changed. That means the particle formation has started. Now you see the color is getting towards pinkish red, some reddish shine is getting. It will be reddish within very soon. Just wait for half a minute. Just keeping this. You see the color is getting changed. So this is the color. So as you have already discussed in our earlier lecture also, that gold nanoparticles of different size have different color. This is pink is red. So the particle size within maybe around 20 to 30 nanometer. Also that can be confirmed through TM imaging, but I'm just showing this video over here. This will also be shared in the YouTube. You can see it over there. So now I am going to the TM image of these nanoparticles. Here you see, these are the different size nanoparticles that can be formed by changing. We can change the pH of the solution, we can change the temperature, we can change the concentration of the precursors, we can change the growth, time of growth, and by varying these conditions, we can produce nanoparticles of different size. You see different size nanoparticles are formed with different colors. So these are different gold nanoparticles of different shape. This is cubic shape, this is hexagonal shapes, these are triangular shaped. Actually this is pyramidal, showing 2D view. These are rod shape structures also. And here are some nanorods, quantum dots. You see the scale bar is 100 nanometer. That means if you see these particles has size roughly 30 nanometers. This one also. This is nanorods of length 100 nanometer. So this is one more example over here. You see fine nanoparticles. You see this is 5 nanometers. So I think this is only 10 to 20 to 30 nanometer is the particle size. Here in this TM, you can also see the lattice pattern That means the arrangement of the atoms in the gold nanoparticles. And these are the result from this paper. They are showing nanoparticles of different size and showing different colors. The sizes are this, and the colors also goes like this. And this is another example of growing gold nanorods of different size. Here is this is the scale bar. You see different size gold nanorods are produced. Okay. Now I have skipped the video of silver nanoparticles. I'm just showing these are the various type of silver nanoparticles that can also be produced by this method. These are spherical particles. These are rod-like structures. These are cubic structures. These are three-dimensional triangular-like structures, prismatic structures, nanorods, flower-like structures, and so on. This is actually this is the SEM image taken from this reference. You can also check the details of the process by go through this link. So why this size dependence occurs? As we see that we have already discussed in our last article also, in the last lecture also, that different size nanoparticles have different colors. For gold, we have seen the color changes from pink, reddish to transparent. So why this occurs? This occurs due to a phenomena called surface plasmon resonance. So what is that? I do not have enough scope to discuss this surface plasmon resonance over here. It will be discussed in the second webinar on quantum nanoengineering. I think the link is also given in the comment box of the last YouTube lecture. So as we know, the metal have a large number of electrons at the surface that can move freely throughout the entire surface. So when a light is incident on it, suppose we have a gold nanoparticle in a tube and we are just observing. So the light is entering, is incident on the nanoparticle. So where light means the electromagnetic wave. So when this electromagnetic wave is incident on these nanoparticles, then the electrons tends to oscillate along with the magnetic field, along with these electromagnetic waves. And if the frequency is small, the electrons can follow the oscillations of the electromagnetic waves. So when the size of the nanoparticle is much smaller than the wavelength of the electromagnetic, suppose if this is the my nanoparticles, if this is the wave, so the size of the nanoparticle is much less than the wavelength of the incident light, then the electron of the nanoparticles oscillate coherently with the electromagnetic wave. So these coherent oscillations is known as the plasmonic oscillations. That leads to absorption of certain light, and as a result, after this absorption, the rest part of the light will be reflected. So that is the actual origin of these colors. So different if the size of these nanoparticles varies, then compared to this wavelength of the electromagnetic wave, then this surface plasmon resonance frequency will also change, and that leads to the resemblance of different types of colors that we have already observed in case of these nanoparticles. So this surface plasmon resonance is a very simple phenomena, but it is very important in determining the color of the nanoparticles. And one thing to mention that by observing these colors also, we can predict the size of the nanoparticles. Once you have standardized the growth process, then by simply observing the color, you can roughly estimate the size of the nanoparticle before going into ACM and TEM, because ACM and TEM measurements are not only time consuming, those are very costly, and sample preparation for those techniques are very difficult. I'll be discussed in the next lecture about this electron microscopic technique, how to observe these nanoparticles. There I will be discussed in details. So observing this nanostructure in ACM TM is fine, but prior to that, in case of metal nanoparticles, by observing the color, we can have a rough estimation of the size of the nanoparticles. So for the surface plasmon resonance, I will suggest you to follow my second webinar on quantum nanoengineering. So today I should stop here. I think there may be a lot of questions. I will address these questions. So those who want to put the questions, you can put the questions in YouTube live streaming or WhatsApp, and also you can put your questions in the Zoom chat box so that we can discuss this thing. So now this session is open for your question. Yeah. Okay. The Zoom users, if you have any question, you can just unmute and you can ask me the question directly. Hello.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Yeah, in case of laser aberration,
Yes.
and that a high energy laser is allowed to fall on the metal surface through a liquid.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that due to high energy laser, that metal gets ferments the
It just
nanoparticles.
melted. Yeah, just melted and produced the
But
particles.
why the liquid is not vapor? Which kind of liquid it is? Why the liquid is not vapor? Which kind of liquid it is?
That choice is very important. You have to suitably choose the liquid. And one thing I must mention here, that this laser beam I'm showing here is quite large. This is very narrow, and when the laser beam incident on the material, the solution also gets heated. Okay, so choice of the liquid is very important.
In case of if we want to prepare gold nanoparticles, then which kind of liquid it should be used?
Water is very suitable for preparing gold nanoparticles.
Water.
Although you may have a confusion that the laser is high energy, so why the water is not vaporized? Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So
that's my question.
Actually, the beam size is very small in the sense it's less than it's less than a millimeter. Okay.
Oh,
so
yeah.
That evaporation rate is quite small, and the laser is directly targeted into the metal, so that as it incident on the metal, the most of the energy is absorbed by the metal, so that the evaporation takes place.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay.
Hello.
Hello.
Sir, I have a few questions about your whole lecture.
Okay.
Okay, sir, my question is in top-down approach, you said that by hammering we can get nanostructures from bulk materials. Okay, yes, sir, it is right. Okay, but I can't understand in bottom-up approach from clusters. How can we obtain nanostructures?
We have atoms. So
yes, sir.
In nanostructures, we have a few 10, 20, 50 atoms. Okay.
Sir.
So in the bottom-up approach, we are doing some chemical reaction. That means we are creating atoms and ions individually, and they are coalesce and agglomerate together to produce the nanocrystals. Then say 10, 20, 100 ions are formed, this agglomerate together to form the nanocrystal.
Okay, sir. Sir, my next question is in pulsed laser deposition, we saw that the produced nanomaterials are actually attached on the surface of a substrate.
Yeah.
But here the produced nanomaterials can't be scattered in all directions.
Yeah, obviously that's scattered in all direction. We are just taking the deposition over the substrate, because that will be scattered in entire direction. We have the substrate over here, and we are taking only this part. These things are getting diverged in the entire direction. And actually, what happens? This once the laser plumes are focused, okay, so that diverging is not quite large. It will diverge, but the divergence is not so large. But there is divergence. That's why the target the substrate is taken as quite large, so that we can prepare a large size thin film using this method. Whereas in case of other methods that I was unable to discuss due to lack of time. Whereas in case of other methods of synthesizing these thin films, the size of the substrate is quite restricted to only 1 to 2 centimeters like that. But here, in this pulse laser deposition process, we can have a large substrate to be covered by a thin film of nanomaterials.
Okay, sir. But actually, there is some probability to fix the more number of nanomaterials at the center of the substrate. Is not it? So can we rotate or some displace the substrate?
If you have that I have told that you have to rotate the substrate also, and you have it is prescribed that the distance should be as large as practicable, so that the film will be uniform. Suppose we have some material and we are just throwing like this. If the wall is far away, then the distribution will be uniform. I mean, if it is too close, all the things will be jumbled up over a single point, so that we have a clusters of structures, not a uniform thin film. That's why target to substrate distance is quite important, and it is obvious that we have to rotate the substrate. And sometimes it is also to be remembered that sometimes that is very unusual case. We have to bias the substrate a bit, but that is not the usual case.
Okay, sir. Actually, sir, in your one slide, I saw a structure named plasma plume. What is this?
Plasma plume is nothing that when the laser is incident on the metal, it produces the vaporized metal particles. That is the plasma plumes. That there may be some neutral atoms, there may be some ions. That is what is called the plasma plumes.
Oh, okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Sir, tell me about precursor solution, if time permits. Precursor solution. What is this?
Precursors mean the initial reactant that we should use. Suppose for production of gold nanoparticles, we say auric chloride, etc., etc. These are the precursors.
Some
Whatever
chemicals.
the chemicals you start with the reaction, those are the precursors.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Another issue is regarding the ball milling process, not the mechanical milling process. That is the scheme was not clearly visible. I will send it in the WhatsApp group also. And another thing is,
Sir.
Huh?
Sir, I have a question about the PLD.
About
the PLD method, pulse laser deposition.
Okay.
So why we are using the pulsed laser array?
Because getting high energy continuous laser is quite difficult, number one. Second, if we use continuous laser, the metal target may have large pores, because that I have shown that we need an XY table, XY movement zone, so that we can move the target also. If the laser pulse is continuous, then process will be same, but it is I think the target will not be able to handle all the entire power within a single time, because it is continuous. If I take 25 instead of 25 kilohertz, if we increase the pulse frequency, then also the rapid process will be rapid, but the target will be poured very easily, so that we have to move the target fast back and forth and in along XY direction, so that the target is not get whole so that the laser beam will hit the beaker and crash the system. That is a limitation mainly. And second point is that getting a high energy continuous laser is quite difficult. Okay, that we have a very high energy laser pulse continuous, that is really very difficult, and its maintenance also.
Okay.
Mostly we use niobium doped yttrium aluminum garment, NDYAG laser. That is a very commercial laser that are being used in the laboratory for different purpose, different optical optical purposes, optical experiment. This is a UV laser basically.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Okay, another question is what is the green balls standing for inside the rotating cylinder of the ball milling machine? Let me check. No, the greens are not actually balls. Actually, the reds are the balls, and the greens and yellows are different types of materials. Suppose we have, say, calcium, we are mixing calcium carbonate and say Fe2O3. So these greens and yellows are different kinds of materials. The reds are balls. Okay. Which particular process you discussed in applied generally to reduce the time and price effect? Truly speaking, chemical method is quite cost effective. And if I say chemical method can be set up in your lab, it will cost approximately within 10 to 20,000 maximum. What the cost matters is the cost of the precursor. Suppose if you go for gold or silver nanoparticles, then you have to buy for silver auric chloride or gold auric chloride or silver chloride, etc. These solutions are quite costly, as you know. This is one cost. And secondly, we saying that this ball milling is a simple technique, but the ball milling, the price of the ball mill machine is not so small, because the price is, as far as I know, it is about 4 to 5 lakhs. Okay, and if we go for other method also that I have not all discussed, that like the chemical vapor deposition process, physical vapor deposition process, etc. These processes are also quite costly. Only thing is that you can go for chemical method, that you can prepare even if in your lab or in your home also, you can set up a chemical method in a laboratory to prepare nanoparticles. In case of laser ablation also, we see that the laser ablation method is quite simple, but having the laser and its maintenance is quite difficult, because the cost of the laser is very high and its alignment is also very difficult. It requires a very high infrastructure. So, and regarding the time you can vary that. In fact, the structures are quite time dependent. If you change the growth time, then obviously the structure of the material will change. So that you have to optimize. Okay. Another is in surface plasmon resonance, how the color changes in reflection and transmission. If you see when the light incident on that, one part is absorbed and the other part is reflected. You can, once the part is absorbed, that you cannot see in the reflected beam, and that part is absorbed, that again being emitted, so that you can observe it in the transmitted beam. While the reflected or scattered light you cannot observe in the opposite side. So from different side the colors appears different. And people have asked also some questions in the last day also, that I think should be discussed in this open forum. So the questions are like this. Okay, let me check. How can we remove arsenic from water by use of nanotechnology? Obviously, we can use not only arsenic, we can remove arsenic and fluoride simultaneously, use a single nanocomposite, calcium-based nanocomposite. That will be discussed, I think probably in 5th or 6th lecture, the environmental aspects of nanotechnology part. Color effect I have already discussed in the last lecture and this lecture also. How do nanomaterials works? I have already discussed. Which nanoparticle is highly used in medical field for which purpose? In most of the cases, gold and silver nanoparticles are getting used more and more in the medical purpose. Obviously, although these are all under laboratory trials, and the experiment have been done over rat also, but it has not applied on the human yet. But the results showing successful destruction of tumors and cancerous cells. Usually, metal nanoparticles are used so that they have free electrons on the surface, so that charge transfer mechanism is quite easier in this case. And let me check the chat box. Okay. In the laser ablation, if we hit the target by laser beam instead of liquid, what will happen? That is the case of pulse laser deposition. That we can prepare the thin film. Okay. Okay. Next, in chemical reaction synthesis, how I choose the reactants? That you have to first find the chemical equations. You have to know what type of materials or metal components will react with what type of chemicals and reduce to metals. That we have to study chemically. After that, you can do it. Okay. Another thing is that for better stabilization of the nanoparticles are covered by some kind of charge. How could it be done? Charge means we have some stabilizers. Stabilizers are basically some molecules and ionic molecules that are given in the solution. So when they get in contact with the solution, they are ionized, and the ions are preferentially attached to the nanoparticles. Another question is, what is spray pyrolysis? Spray pyrolysis is another process of producing nanomaterials. I'll discuss two of these methods. One is spray pyrolysis and evaporation method in the next day's lecture. So, is there any other questions? If you have any other questions, you can just unmute in the Zoom chat box and you can ask. And someone has asked about the size effect of nanoparticles, mostly in animals, that we have done in earlier cases. I mean, in earlier lecture, I've shown that in the polar region, the creatures have large size to reduce the energy loss. So someone has asked to discuss this matter. Okay, let's open it first. Here this is. Okay. I think the screen is shared. Why it's not working? Okay. Okay. So I think in polar region, they have a large size because in the same volume, size being large, the surface area being small, so that the energy heat radiated to the atmosphere will be small, so that they have to consume less amount of food because there is a crisis in the food in the polar region to survive. So they will have a large size. That is one of the reason of the large size creatures in the polar region, and small creatures are really very difficult to find in polar regions, because in mostly polar regions 3 types of creatures are there. One is penguin, another is polar bear, and the third one is the a middle kind of rabbit, nothing else. So if you have any more questions, you can directly ask. You can unmute in Zoom chat box and you can ask. And the session is open for discussions. Okay, so in case if you don't have any questions, if you have any further questions, you can write me in my email and in the WhatsApp group also. I'll be happy to answer you to all these questions. And one thing to remember that in the YouTube live streaming, you can get a feedback link, and I will also share right now the feedback link in the YouTube in the this email, through this email or the WhatsApp chat box also. I will send the feedback, and you have to submit this feedback by 12 o'clock, because after that the link will be closed. And once again, I must thank all the participants, and will be really very happy if you becomes useful from this lecture series. And I must thank Mr. Arjun Patra, the Department of Botany, Prabhat Kumar College, Kontai, for hosting and managing this entire communication systems as a moderator. And thank you very much. So see you in the next lecture on Sunday.